Welcome to Harmony Talk, a podcast about dreamers and doers. Here, people from all walks of life tell us about their dreams, how they fulfilled them, and the moment they knew there was no turning back. This podcast is sponsored by AM Skyer, a third-generation family insurance business started in 1920. I'm your host, Todd Stephens. If you've ever watched TV, seen a movie, played a video game, even gone to a theme park, then chances are you've heard the brilliant work of my next guest. Today, we welcome Chris Thomas, award-winning composer, conductor, and symphony cellist, best known for bringing emotion and adventure to so many of our daily pastimes. Chris won a Hollywood Music and Media Award and has won the American Prize in Composition twice, just to name a couple of his many accolades. His work can be heard on television shows ranging from CSI and Lost to The Golden Bachelorette and The Kardashians. His big screen work includes films like Haymaker, Don't Look Back, and Woman Rebel. If that doesn't keep him busy enough, he creates immersive sound experiences through his work at theme parks like Universal and even the gaming world, creating a soundtrack for the blockbuster series Fortnite. Chris, your sound is certainly all around us. Thanks for joining us on Harmony Talk.
Oh, goodness. Thank you for the invite. It's nice to be here.
Terrific. Well, it's great to have you. And I must assume that becoming a composer in the modern era is a steep and unique climb. Was this a childhood dream of yours?
Actually, it was. This was precisely the dream I've had since I was a fifth grader.
Wow. And did music all of a sudden start running through your head as a young child, or were you influenced more about what you saw and heard around you?
I would say I realized my obsession with music began probably when I was 10 years old, I think in second grade. You know, my parents are both classically trained musicians, and I heard music around the house all the time. But it was until I heard Beethoven on the piano, with a music teacher she was trying to get a keyboard to make some sound. This is in the early days of synths and portable little electronic keyboards. And she played just a little bit of Beethoven's Für Elise just to see if the keys were working. And I just took this mental snapshot of that little motif at the beginning. And I just held on to it all day, saying it over and over so I could get home to my mom and say, Mom, what is the song that goes ba-da-da-da at the piano? And she said, oh, I think I know what it is, and was able to play a little bit of it back and named it for me. And I thought, oh, this is what my life is about from now on. I need to learn Beethoven starting today. And it just grew from there.
So at 10 years old, you knew what you wanted to do.
It was all over right then and there. Nothing has ever steered me off that path. I've been tempted by things at various moments, but nothing has ever come close to hijacking my attention. It's just only been music until suddenly it wasn't just learning music. It was recognizing the sounds in my head were also original and that I needed to start creating it. And that was only a few years later when I was a fifth grader.
Well, that's amazing. In fifth grade, and you seem to have had the ability to know that you needed to get what was in your head out. How did that translate for you? Were your parents supportive of that? Did they lead you down the path?
Yes, they were quite supportive, which is not the normal story for most composers. You ask most people in my line of work, their families desperately tried to steer them into something other than music. It was cute to do it, and it was maybe in some cases good even to get a scholarship, but it was, oh, please go to medical school. Please go to law school. Please do something you can count on.
Right.
But my parents were like, no, if you're going to go for it, go for it. Let's do the work, and we'll stand by you so long as you're doing the work. And they encouraged me to go down this road as far as I could.
And you're from the Pacific Northwest. We should let everyone know you're speaking to us today from Bend, Oregon. Is that correct?
At the moment, I am in Central Oregon and Bend. Yeah.
That's terrific. And in that area, when you're growing up in rural Oregon, I guess, is there access to that type of music? You know, music stores, lessons for instrumentalists, those sorts of things? Or is that something you have to search out?
A little bit of both things. So I grew up in a small little ranching rodeo town and way out in Eastern Oregon where it's very sparse. I mean, there was maybe like 5,000 to 7,000 people in my hometown when I was growing up. But I was eventually spotted by a teacher who knew how to work with someone like me. She kept me practicing the piano. She knew I needed to read and understand music at a deeper level, but also helped encourage me as a young composer. And she would work with my parents, and they found young composer opportunities at like Portland State and various other colleges that would have these programs. They would adopt a young composer for a year. put us in an ensemble, like a mixed modern ensemble, and let us write for them and do an end of the year concert. And so I got to work with professional musicians along the way with these young composer projects. Portland has one that's still ongoing, and I've worked with them in recent years, more as like a mentor and an instructor rather than a student, called Fear No Music. That's a group of professors at Portland State, and they have a really renowned young composer program in the Pacific Northwest, and they were a very key part of my upbringing in music. But I did have to travel to really step up the kind of feedback that I needed, because my local teacher could only take me so far, but give me the foundations. But she had to send me to people in lots of other places who could really develop this further.
Well, it makes me think too, as a child going through this, you obviously have a calling at a time when you're growing up. I imagine your peers aren't necessarily hearing classical compositions and things like that. How do you interact with your peers when you explain to them, I want to be a composer? What do other kids think of that? Do they even think, that that's a possibility for them? Or are they like, what is this kid thinking? I mean, it's unique at that age.
Not until a little bit of junior high, but mostly in high school, I found more acceptance than not. As a grade schooler, it was just my own thing. And my teachers, I think, found it more curious and adorable, thinking I would probably phase out of it, and didn't quite appreciate how deep my obsession really was. But by high school, I think all my teachers understood how serious I was. I was becoming very competitive. I was doing all kinds of state competitions, really trying to show I was going to do this. And I became more that quirky kid who was like, oh, he's that kid who wants to be a composer. This is our local musician. Hey, band choir teachers, let's let this guy write for an ensemble. Let him write a concert choir piece. Let him write a jazz band piece. Let him write a string orchestra piece. Because there weren't any other students trying to do this. And it was just kind of a quirky thing they would just humor me with. And over my years in school began to encourage me further the more they saw, oh, he really is doing this. That's not a bad piece of music. And then my high school teachers began taking the ensemble pieces I would write to state competitions or like district competitions. So they would program and I would get feedback from festival judges about the composition. And so that was their way of supporting me, to say, hey, well, we can't critique your composing, but one of the judges probably can. And so it became more supportive as time went on.
Well, I played the tuba in the marching band in high school, so, I understand how creating music at that age can be confusing sometimes to other people who don't see that same calling. It's amazing that you were embraced not only by your family, but also the community, and then the broader community at large when you're talking about competitions. And I think I heard a story one time when your father took you to a music store. You ran right to one section. Can you explain that to us and what you were looking for at the time?
Yeah. There was a moment, if we go back in time a little bit to that juncture when I was a fifth grader, now I realize it was a juncture in my life where I would be practicing piano, but then I would take little bits and pieces of the music that was under my fingers and I would say, well, these three notes here, there's something else we can do with it. And then I would change the harmony around it. I would just explore and elaborate. And after 20 minutes of practicing, I would get lost for 2 hours just improvising. Over time, I realized, oh, the music in my head, I think I'm making some of this up. I think I'm generating ideas. And when I brought this up with my dad, as a musician, he said, the way authors write books or painters paint paintings, composers are like authors, but of music, and they have to put it down on paper. He said, what you're doing is creative. You're actually making new music. Even if it's starting with other people's melodies, you're transforming them into a new thing. And he was like, this is no different than how authors write books. And he said, I have to show you something. I need to go to Portland. That was the closest sheet music store we had. And so that was 3 hours away from us out in farm country. And we went over to the section where we had Beethoven scores, and I bought my first 2 Beethoven symphonies. So I was listening to them quite a bit, and he wanted me to make the connection to what I was hearing to how it was laid out on paper. And more importantly, he said, now I want to show you something very important. And here's this rack of notepads just climbing high up this wall. And he just told me to pick, and I pulled down this paper, and it was like music paper with the 5 lines running across the page, but there were no notes on them. And he said, authors write books on blank paper and composers fill in the notes on this kind of paper. So before the music exists, you have these lines, and now it's your job to figure out what notes go on these lines. This is what composers do. And so they had a name for what I wanted to become. And I realized, oh, I'm a composer. And I just knew from that moment, I'm going to fill out these books with new music. And so that was how I put it together.
That's amazing. So at that point, a composer was born.
Like in the most literal sense, I had a name for what it was I wanted to do.
Yeah. And you heard that Beethoven piece, and that was it. That's what stuck with you. Not jazz, not country music, not rock, pop. It was classical, which I think is just tremendous.
Yeah, it's what truly captured my heart. With time, I got into, lots of other mediums, and there's so many genres I fell in love with later, but it was the great classics and romantics classical that really captured my attention.
Well, and then as you continue to evolve, you were actually accepted into the University of Southern California's program for motion pictures and television soundtracks. As a composer, how did cinema really speak to you, and not just, symphonic composition and that which we're more familiar with from a composing and conducting standpoint?
Yeah, there's another whole layer to the story we've just covered, because there was the falling in love with the music part. But what we haven't covered was I was simultaneously very obsessed with the craft of cinema and storytelling. And I really wanted to know more about how cinema was made. And there was a point when I began to realize there's this music doing something behind these motion pictures that I love. And I fell in love with all the classic filmmakers. I wasn't really just into the living filmmakers of my own time. I realized after my first Kurosawa film, I thought, oh, wow, Japanese cinema, there's something to this. And the sound of the Toru Takemitsu soundtracks, that Kurosawa would bring in. And then Alfred Hitchcock was a favorite of mine. And I kept seeing the same name over and over, Bernard Herrmann, music for all of his movies, or his most notable features. Then Hitchcock led me to Truffaut and Fellini. And with Fellini, I saw the name Nino Rota over and over. And I began to realize I had these affinities with these composers on screen. And finally, I began to correlate, James Horner with this filmmaker. John Williams works with Steven Spielberg over and over, Danny Elfman and Tim Burton. And this is in my own time. And I thought, oh, wow, is this a thing? Is there this other way I can have a career? Because I wanted to be a composer, but I was really afraid to go out there and just be a concert composer and have to, work at a bank all day or sell insurance and then write whenever I could. And here I was just in love with the craft of cinema. But what I really loved was the idea of a composer and a director can create these lifelong collaborations, and they seem to do that. And I thought, I would like to go here. I love the craft of storytelling, which is a big part of why I love composition. And that's why I always associate what I do with, how authors write books, composers tell stories with music. And that was the driving force that kept me in it. But the difference was I saw an actual professional, sustainable path as a composer. I thought, I need to go make some filmmaker friends. I can't just hang out with musicians. I want to learn from other musicians, but I want to embed in the film community. And I would consider my first big break professionally was getting accepted into USC's graduate program for film music, because then I was embedded into USC Cinema's ecosystem, where I was working with the future of Oscar-winning filmmakers. And everyone who comes through that program tends to find their footing in the industry. And I thought, this is where I need to position myself someday, and was lucky to do just that.
That's exciting. And can you take us back to the day that you found out that you were accepted and what that felt like?
Yeah, it's funny. I had a lot of academic struggles growing up. Science and math have just always been a horrible struggle for me. And I just have no way with numbers. And people always say, but music and math are the same. It's like, sure, if you consider subdividing notes, music, maybe in one way that's true. But to me, music isn't subdividing notes and durations. And it's not about math. It's an expressive tool to me. Yes, music is constructed of that stuff. I never resonated with the sciences. And my teachers kind of marked me as someone who was going to have academic struggles, and they didn't really expect me to get into good schools. And the idea of getting in somewhere like USC or any graduate program anywhere was just so far off to me. It wasn't until my undergrad where I landed at a school where I had to take a lot of science classes because I was doing 2 concurrent degrees. That's when I realized, I have teachers who really care about the subject matter, and spent a lot of time working with me. And I was getting great grades across the board. And I realized, oh, maybe the little town I'm from that I grew up in wasn't best preparing me to learn what it was I could truly do, just intellectually. I needed to be in a slightly more challenging environment. And I began to grow a little more confidence in myself over the years, but it was still a long shot to get into a program where they maybe take 12 people out of 2,500 applicants. And so even if music was my specialty and my advantage, it was still a really slim chance. And I got in on early admission. So when I got that email preemptively saying, hey, you're about to get a packet from us, but we just want to pre-congratulate you. You're already accepted into USC scoring. For my family, that was a very meaningful moment. As a ninth grader, I decided that's where I wanted to go to grad school. And we knew it was a long shot, but the point was to try and do it. And when I got in, the first person I called was my dad, because it was such a far-fetched dream for a farm town kid to end up somewhere like this, getting to work with A-listers in the industry the way I did was really far off. That wasn't a likely thing. And again, this is why I consider it my first real break in life. I thought, oh, wow, if I can run with them, what else can I do? You know?
Right, right. Who was more excited, you or your father?
Oh, gosh, probably my dad. He-
I think when you musically inclined, as you said your parents were, I'm assuming similar upbringing, not quite as exposed to the outside world, perhaps being in that rural area, that really must have been a fulfillment of perhaps a dream of theirs in one way or another.
Yeah, I'm not a parent myself, but I can imagine it must feel pretty great to see, oh, wow, look at that. He can do it. Like he's made of the stuff after all. Because I mean, I didn't know, and they probably didn't either. And it was just really fortunate. And it was just a very gratifying moment. But then it was time to do the work. Yeah. So that was the next question is, can I survive in an environment like this where most people don't last very long? Am I actually made of this stuff for the long haul in this industry?
Were you ever told through that process that you didn't have the stuff? Or did you ever question whether you were headed down the right path?
I had my moments where I questioned myself, but once I was in, they treated me as someone who deserved to be in this program. The various instructors and composers around LA, I would express my doubts all the time. And their response was usually, we invited you here. How dare you question yourself? You can do this. Like, just show up and do it. Like, show us, that we were right because we think we are. They often were my best support. They never added any doubt. They were in the business of removing doubt and pushing me to new limits. And every week we would do a new recording, a new project against pitcher, and a new compositional challenge, a new technical scoring to pitcher challenge. And every time I doubted myself, they said, no, you can do this and you will see on Friday, you're made of this stuff. Like you were made to do this. That's why you were invited here. And when I would, they would just pat themselves on the back and say, why do you keep complaining? You deserve to be here. And I'm the biggest doubter of my own ability. So,
Wow. Well, you must have been good at handling criticism. That's all I can say.
oh, there's a lot of criticism. And the work you do in film music is very criticism driven. It's to compare it to a concert commission. It's, hey, 2 years from now, we have a concert. We'd like to open up this much space on a program. We have this budget. Bring your artistic greatness to our stage. We'll stay out of your way, just deliver the music. And your relationship to the commissioning orchestra is something like this, like, I am the composer. I will tell you, what you...
Oz.
Yeah, they kind of put you in this pedestal of a position where in film, you're a lowly, humble servant to the needs of a production. And before they spend the money on recording all this music live and bringing in players and the mix crew and all that stuff, orchestrators, copyists, the whole team, it costs a little something to produce a film score. The relationship is here. Do these elaborate digital mock-ups, send your drafts back and forth, and we'll tell you what we don't like. And it's like, I don't know. We said, let's follow this character through this scene. I don't know. It's not working for us. Can you change this? Can you add this theme here instead of this theme? And they're constantly picking your music apart, changing direction, because in film, it's just a back and forth collaboration. You're not the special guest who gets to set the tone for anything. You answer to the production, and you have to get into their minds and their creative interest to bring their movie to life. A composer doesn't advance their career by scoring a movie. The success of the movie is what advances everyone's careers together. And so your interest is making the film the best film they need it to be. And so it's a very different relationship. So criticism is the name of the game, collaborative criticism.
Well, and you said something there that I really resonated with me, where you said, you don't set the tone. The funny part of that is, to me, that, right? I mean, the obvious thing.
I hear the irony in this.
Right. The irony here is that your scores really set the tone to the production. And, I realized this personally yesterday, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I was actually listening to Imagine Symphony live yesterday while I was trying to work. And for our listeners, Chris created the score for Imagine Symphony, which is a tremendous project, which I want to ask you about. But as I'm listening to this, I'm also working. It's nice to be able to have some music on in the background. And I'm working along, and I'm noticing I'm making mistakes as I was doing some data entry. And then I'm noticing I'm hitting my keys harder and harder, and I'm asking myself, why am I getting so frustrated? And I realized that the tone of what I was listening to was becoming so intense that subconsciously I was completely wrapped up in this tremendous symphony. And I had to take a break, continue listening to the music, and stop working. So I can attest to the fact that you evoke emotion in your work. So thank you for that. Not thank you for the lack of productivity I had in those few moments. But when you talk about setting the tone, can you tell us a little bit about the Malheur Symphony, which is, for those listeners who don't know, you were commissioned, I believe, to create a symphony for Malheur is a tremendous place, very controversial. Back, I think, in the 2016, 2017, there was an occupation of federal land, drawing a lot of emotion from a lot of people, including the Paiute Indian tribe, I believe, the Native Americans who lived there at one time. Can you just tell us, Paiute, I'm sorry, can you just tell us a little bit about that project? Because what a masterful piece of work.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, that piece, like a lot of my concert works, I like them to overlap into very visual and storytelling places. I have a hard time writing music that isn't about a very specific story. And even if an organization approaches me with no prompt, out of my own discomfort, I need to start talking with them like, hey, what about your organization? What about the place you live? What about things affecting all of our lives right now? I shop around to find resonant issues or landscapes or visuals or stories, something to give me something personal to jump off with, because the more I can turn it into a tale or a reflection of something visual, then music will come to me very fluently. And often they're not accustomed to composers asking, a symphony board to get into a storytelling process together. They say, well, we have the funds, you just write the music. And I'm like, well, then let's talk about that. And it's often a little confusing for them, and they're often not looking to be involved on the creative side, but I'm trying to force them into it. But this was a case that was just perfect. They came to me with a story, with a message, with not only those, but a reflection of a place. And they wanted me to really get into the real visual, textural soundscape, at the most literal level of this place, of the Malheur Wildlife Refuge. And a local biologist approached the symphony and said, hey, is there somebody around I can talk to about creating a concert work to divert the public's attention away from this armed far-right occupation of the refuge, where they destroyed all matter of native artifacts and just trashed the facilities and had an armed standoff with the FBI for something like 41 days. He said, suddenly the Malheur Refuge is in the news all the time, but now it's become associated with this. Could we do a big cultural project to make some new headlines and draw the nation's attention back to this place for what it should stand for? And I thought, Oh, wow. As somebody who just loves this kind of work, this kind of storytelling, but also as somebody with a background in political science, which is a different, that was my other degrees. I thought, wow, the convergence of all these aspects of my life have come together here, and I would love to do this. And so they went about some fundraising to bring me onto the project, but also mostly to bring the symphony out to premiere the work at the refuge. And they had sent me out there a number of times to meet with birders, then another trip with biologists, and then another extended trip to work with the tribes out there and hear their story and history of the land. Because I wasn't sure what exactly to write about. There seemed to be a lot of things. But after a period, I realized, oh, everyone I've met with has told me a really crucial chapter of this land's story. And it begins with the biological and geographical formations of the region. That's where the geologist filled me in on the long prehistoric story of what the Malheur Basin is. And then that moves into, oh, well, the people who lived here 10,000 years before this point were these two tribes. And then it's like, okay, well, then there were very dark times, in the 1870s and westward expansion period and the treatment of the tribes. And then I wanted to write a piece about the most famous thing in this refuge, which was the birds. So the fourth movement was about a particular bird that just made me laugh. And I just thought it had a funny call. And the fifth movement was reflecting the way all of these different groups had come together and all had a shared hope for the future. The government and the tribes had suddenly this profound common cause for how to better protect the land, and began to work together and consult with one another on every issue, and have since developed an incredibly productive relationship together because of this armed occupation. And suddenly there's this emergence of a unified front moving forward between all these communities. And I thought, oh, that's how we end this thing, because that's where we are. And that was the fifth movement. And so for me as a composer, it was just a wonderful experience to bring all these things together.
Well, it's a masterful piece. And the one thing that really caught me was how you used the sounds of the birds to actually create the music and, really associated them either with strings or brass. It was so unique when I first heard about it. Then I learned that that actually was a topic of a TED Talk, that you actually did a TED Talk about that piece.
Yeah. I told them no 3 times, though, because I didn't see that there was a talk there. And they had already closed off the event for speakers 7 or 8 months earlier, but they had heard about this project I was working on. And Oregon Public Broadcasting had done some stories about this piece I was writing, and the TED people caught wind of it. And there's this rule in music where they say talking about music is like dancing architecture. It doesn't make sense. If you're going to talk about music, don't just play it. Just show the music. And I kept saying, no, there's no story here. There's no story here. And they said, and eventually they said, what are you talking about? It's not just about the music. It's not just about melodies and rhythm. It's the whole story about how you're engaging these communities, building something, and you're trying to bring the premiere of this piece into this very politically divided place. And the end goal for you, you keep saying, is to have everyone sit in a room who hasn't sat together in a few years and come together and be unified at least over one thing, at least in the celebration of the place they live. It's one small step in this very partisan situation. And that's a beautiful thing. Can you talk about that? And then there just happens to be music that goes with it. And I thought, oh, shoot, that's a very TED thing to do. Okay, I'm in. But then I only had 6 weeks to put my talk together.
It was a great talk. And I encourage people to go out and take a look and find Chris's TED Talk, because it's not only enlightening, entertaining, but it also has a great message, which you've just summarized for us. Do you consider yourself an old soul?
I don't know. I just consider me the person I've always been.
How's that for a question out of left field, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I would probably be the last to know. Like most things, I'm usually not the first to notice.
Oh, it was just interesting because of your inspiration and where you've drawn your life's work, and the roots of it. And even looking back on some of the film inspirations that you've had, it's not like the first time you saw Star Wars, you knew you wanted to do this. You went deep. That's why I asked the question. But yeah, the golden age is that for sure. I wish we had more time, but a couple things I wanted to mention and ask you about quickly. The Grammys are one of the pinnacle awards in music. You actually are one of the people who has a vote. How do you wrap your head around that responsibility?
I always tell myself, stick to the facts. Just because I like an artist doesn't mean they're going to get my vote. I even voted down a few of my favorite artists and composers because I saw someone else who came along. I gauge everything on a 5-point criteria, which are just the 5 basic components of what is music made of. If I just personally like something, I'd love to upvote it, but really I'm listening. Has this artist truly exercised every category of what makes good music musical? Did they really think about how to write a good melody? Are there lots of good curves, shapes? Is it fascinating? Did they do something interesting with harmony, interesting with rhythm? And are they integral parts of the piece? It could be a pop song, it could be orchestral works, but you have to impress me in 5 different ways. Doesn't matter who you are. If you've done the work of creating great music across the board, you get my vote.
Is AI becoming more of a challenge in the composition area and music in general? Curious of your thoughts.
I'm sure it will. I'm sure it will. It's bound to disrupt things at some point. And I'm sure it's just going to keep evolving. I think it'll disrupt things for a while. People will probably swing back and forth like, oh, we're going to score all these movies with this studio with AI. Some will probably be firm in the camp of no, our messages, we employ artists. And it'll find its place, I'm sure. But I think the people who are just writing very repeatable, formulaic music, who just stock production libraries for very low royalty-free stuff, I think, they're going to be the first to be eliminated, because anything that you can produce at a mass scale that anybody can learn to do and repeat, which is to say it's not interesting. It's flat, predictable. It may as well be AI music, honestly. They're the ones who, are the first to go. I think my job is to continue to be as unpredictable an artist as possible. Never let people see where you're coming from. And it's a call to be more interesting, inventive, colorful. And I think the most important, again, is the word unpredictable. Much like social media, don't let it flatten you into a predictable thing where it knows it can feed you something and start to predict your responses. People will always be drawn to authenticity and color.
Well, and I think you've done a great job with that. I mean, I've listened to a significant amount of your music, and I would say that it is unpredictable, I think, is a great way to explain it. Well, you can listen to classical music where it just kind of blends into the background sometimes, and yours requires a bit more attention. And I think when you're talking about kind of evoking an emotional response, you're surprised by it, which I think has a lot to do. And like you said, with the risk of AI, one thing that you do, which is very interesting, is you teach. You bring your knowledge and your experience to others. You offer through your Scoresmiths program. Is it important for you to help people who are coming along in the industry? And aren't you just creating more competitors for yourself?
I want to create more competitors for myself.
Good,
I want to
That's
raise
great.
the bar of composing standards in this business and creative engagement. My course isn't one of those, like, here's a few quick tricks to get you on the A-list and get you paid today. It's like, no, my course promises a long and difficult road of skill building, self-discovery, and a lot of really harsh realities about this. I promise you nothing, but I can give you the tools to at least have a chance. Because that's how it really works. There is no sidestep. There is no quick fix. There is no ladder. There's only your own authentic journey and your own relation building process that you have to create for yourself. It's not what people are often looking for, but it's the truth. And so, needless to say, it's not the most popular message, but I have to be honest with people. And what I ask of them as composers is a lot. It's to not be predictable, flat, sound this way to get work. No, sound your way to stand out, to actually get work. If you just blend in, then you're just devaluing, because anyone else can do what you do. Why would I put somebody out with that mindset? So, yeah, it's finding your voice is a big part of what I teach too.
Do you see promise in younger people getting into the field?
You know what? Honestly, it's hard to say. I think a lot of people get into the field because they just want to sound like things they hear. And they often increasingly don't stick around long enough to find anything in themselves. It's like, oh, thanks for getting me this far. I'm going to drop out because there's I bought a MIDI chord pack set where it's just all the harmonies pre-written and I could just put loops and beats on it. And this feels like music making to me. And it's like, well, it's harmony everyone else is using from the same chord pack. You literally are just taking free chord progressions. And there's not much hope for that. But then some of the young competitors who come along that I've been meeting are even more fierce. It's fewer of them, but they're more ferocious than I'm accustomed to. And so I'm inspired by the few who are really going for it because I can't believe how hard they're really working. So yes and no. In general, it's getting more difficult, but the ones who are trying are really trying. So, and I'm going to try to be there for them. So.
Well, I know you're still in the midst of your career, but if you had to look back, over the last 20 years or so, what would you have told your younger self now looking back from your position today? Any tips or advice you would have given the 16-year-old Chris?
It would have been to be a little more fearless in my earlier years. I was given a lot of advice about how to listen to and conform with the trend. And there was a period where I think I inflicted real damage on myself when I tried to take that advice seriously. And my music became like the others for a bit. I tried, and this was shortly after the 2008 crash when things were getting dicey and a lot of bigger names and representatives, agents I was becoming involved with were putting a lot of effort into really making me a slightly more predictable composer. And what it did was make me not only just predictable, but unremarkable. And it seemed to chase away more business than not. And the business it did bring in brought in some of the worst treatment I've ever experienced. It was people who didn't respect what I did until I finally decided to stop listening, plant my own flag and just say, all right, whoever's looking, this is what I have. I decided to dig really deep and find the most personal things about myself to put into the music. And I spent some years not having a lot of business because I was trying to reestablish myself for my sound. And I thought, the Balinese gamelan is a huge part of my life. Why am I suppressing? Like, I'm always trying to add elements, but I've always been really cautious about it. I'm going to be the opposite of that. I'm going to smear it everywhere. Like, you will know I'm somebody who loves gamelan now. You're going to know that I'm somebody who loves this, this, this. And I just mixed together the most personal parts of my musical history and really try to dial in a sound. And after just doing a few projects, then I was getting calls just to have that thing that I do. And suddenly I'm being brought into projects on my own terms. It wasn't, hey, can you be a cut rate Hans Zimmer? Hey, can you be a cut rate Danny Elfman? They said, no. Can you just do that thing I heard here? Like, your sound, I don't know what to call it, but this is what we need. And so I realized, no, I don't need to capture everyone's attention. I just need to capture the true believers and the true sympathetic creatives who hear something in themselves in what I'm doing as well. It seemed to create more authentic partnerships along the way. That became my new strategy. That was one of the most liberating moments for me. I would have stuck to it sooner with a little more confidence.
Well, that's great advice, not only for somebody in the composing business, but really anyone who's going out there, right? Your music has taken you all over, and it's been played, obviously, in Carnegie Hall and, really all over the world. Is there anything you've learned about humanity that may be surprising, or are we all the same? Are we all so different? There's so much division in the world these days, globally even. What's your worldview?
Despite the little differences, whether brought on by ideology or forces of culture, my experience is that we are really not so different. The cool thing about getting to travel and work everywhere, whether it's other countries or within the United States, just to keep it more local, I work in equal numbers of blue and red states. And my friends who don't get to, so since I live between two blue states, I have a lot of friends who just don't have it in them to go visit a red state. But I have friends that I work with for years and years and years in red states who just haven't brought themselves to go visit a blue state. And they project a lot of ideas about what life is really like and what people are really like in either. And I seem to not satisfy anybody's stereotype of it. And I realize in each place, everyone is so much more similar and they really think and say the same things and they're equally reasonable. And even where we have slight disagreements, they're really more slight than not. And when as local media shrinks and people look toward nationalized sources, they nationalize in very partisan ways that make you think, oh, everyone here says and does things like this, and everyone here is this other caricature, but neither of them are correct. It's grown so frustrated to hear people's projected ideas of each other. But when you go, they're completely wrong. I've been deep into Biden-Harris country and found them to be just as similar as people in Kansas City that I've known and loved for years. And I just can't believe we talk past each other like this when we have so much more in common than not. I don't really think we're truly polarized in any real sense. We've been conditioned to think we are. But if we could merge a little bit, if there was some way to bring us a little closer together and talk just a little more, it would dispel, I think, what a lot of the media partisanship has put on us over the years. So the long answer to say, no, I think we're pretty much more similar than we appreciate.
Yeah, I mean, you think about the basic needs, human needs. We need food, shelter. Everybody likes a sunny day, those sorts of things. And it's wonderful that music really is a universal language, and I think that that's such a beautiful thing that, as a young child, your dream was to become a composer, and you're doing it.
Yeah, I'm extremely lucky.
So congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, congratulations on your career today. I have lots more questions. I'd love to get into gaming and theme parks, but I really want to encourage everyone to go to christhomasmusic.com. Where will we see you next? Where will we hear you next?
Well, I have some music for a few reality shows coming up. I think there's going to be more on the next season of Bachelor and Kardashians. I'm currently on a documentary that will very likely be coming out with PBS called 13 Crosses, about 13 firefighters who died in 1949. I'm in the middle of developing that score very, very closely with a filmmaker. It's a lot of back and forths. And we've settled on this musical idea where I'm trying to get 13 notes in every melody to represent each of the firefighters. So we're trying to go a little meta on this. And it's hard to lock to picture when you're dealing in groups of 13s and trying to stick to your guns on that. So, but we're in the middle of this very creative back and forth on that matter. But that's the next thing I have. That's the most immediate thing I have coming up.
Oh, that's great. And gamers can hear you when they clock into a version of Fortnite. And if you're at Universal, you'll hear your music as well. And of course, the TV shows and the motion pictures that I've mentioned already. Chris, it's been a real pleasure talking to you today. Thanks for being on the program.
Oh, certainly. I really appreciate this. Thank you.
Thank you. We've been talking with certified dreamer and doer, Chris Thomas, renowned composer who truly evokes emotion and a sense of adventure through his work in film, television, gaming, and theme parks. Please check out christhomasmusic.com to learn more. We hope you enjoyed this episode of HarmonyTALK podcast, presented by AM Skyer, a third-generation family insurance business started in 1920. I'm Todd Stephens. For everyone out there, keep dreaming and doing.